Madam Web is the newest entry into the 2021 renamed SSU, Sony Spider-Man universe, and to no one's surprise, it was a box office bomb. It failed to create compelling characters, a believable setup, and an interesting plot. Basically everything a movie needs to succeed on an $80 million budget. Without further ado, let's break down why the movie was so bad.
I just want to go home and watch Idol.
Answer whether it could have been saved with a minor rewrite, and why SSU movies in general are prone to fail. Spoiler, it's not as simple as plain bad writing. There's actually a complicated legal situation at the heart of it all. Hi, my name is Pat, welcome to Rewrite. Today I'm gonna take a look at 2024's Madam Web. Let's delve into the shortcomings, as there's little to nothing praiseworthy about Madam Web. While the visual effects are competently executed, they fail to compensate for glaring technical deficiencies in editing, directing, and pacing, as well as the actors' lackluster performances, the bizarre premise, and the horrible failure of a script. Even lead actress Dakota Johnson expressed dissatisfaction while promoting the movie. Most superhero origin stories have a science fiction-y, alien-y, or mystical element to them. Regardless of how unrealistic or implausible the story is, its sole purpose is to suspend the viewer's disbelief to prepare them for what's to come. Madam Web completely fails at that. The notion of a mundane spider imbuing superhuman abilities strains the audience's credulity. It lacks the mythic or scientific foundation typical of such narratives. What about vampires, werewolves, and wendigos then? Well, they're mythical creatures in origin, and not something a passerby randomly stumbles across while traveling the rainforests of Peru. Madam Web's origin story is almost the same as Morbius. Search for a cure, end up with superpowers instead. But Morbius' transformation has a science fiction basis to help audiences suspend disbelief. Is such a transformation plausible? Not at all. It's more mystic than scientific, but that's beside the point. The worst thing about the main character for me was her half-baked and unfinished backstory, full of narrative lacunae. Honestly, where's the daddy in all this? Madam Web ended up being plagued by a similar issue Disney's Strange World suffered from. A key character was omitted from the main conflict of the story, and the only reason I can think of is the writers didn't want to deal with it. Once again, not dealing with an issue raises more questions like Cassie wasn't born on American soil, so after her birth, someone had to come to claim her from the rainforest and apply for her American citizenship. Huge important chunks are missing from her life. Furthermore, the protagonist has no unique characteristic or likable traits.
You have a winning personality. I guess I got yours by mistake.
You're an asshole.
Even when saving people, she seems bored. Being a paramedic is clearly not her calling. The only aspect that sets her apart from other characters is her premonitory ability, which she again doesn't care too much about and awkwardly readily accepts. The majority of the supporting cast is rather unnecessary. They tried to make them a part of her life but failed. At no point in time did I feel like Cassie would engage with those people if it weren't in the script. Besides that, the movie tried too desperately to link itself to Spider-Man, almost as if it was trying to justify its existence. To me, that was one of its weakest points. The takeout scene, the cat, and the baby shower, it felt like the movie tried hard to fill the screen with literally anything they could because there wasn't an engaging enough story to tell. At first I thought the villain was the Ezekiel Sims, but he just turned out to be generic villain number 2045. I don't understand why he wanted superpowers in the first place. It seemed like a spur of the moment decision. I don't understand why he wore a Spider-Man suit since Spider-Man doesn't even exist yet. I don't understand why he runs around New York assaulting teenagers rather than isolating them and killing them in private. Every slasher serial killer ever is smarter than this guy. I don't understand why he thought he could get away with murdering people in public in broad daylight. I do not understand this villain at all. Attempts were made to depict him as being smart, but then his subsequent actions undo everything. His plans are the epitome of stupidity. Just grab a gun, shoot them, and scale the walls to escape, leaving no trace. Problem solved. Except for the villain, Madam Web and a bunch of people in the Peruvian rainforests have no superpowers. Most of the time, Cassandra just tries to squash Bugboy with something. I'm not even sure if Madam Web counts as a superhero movie at this point. What's the story here? I'm confused as to why the villain gets premonitions of his death in the far future, and I'm no expert on this matter, but wouldn't minor changes to the present lead to significant changes later on? The fact that his intervention never changed anything was wasted story potential that could have set this movie apart from the other generic origin stories. The premise of the movie sounds interesting, a villain trying to change his fate by killing the heroes before they receive their powers, but the problem is that you need a smart person to write complex and compelling time travel stories. To me, it doesn't even feel like the script was finished.
Like a Girl Scout girl. Be that. Just be that.
To be fair, Dakota Johnson mentioned there was a complete overhaul of the story after she signed on. I'm not her biggest fan, but I'll stick up for her, which means nothing, but she really got the short end of the stick here. When I think about influential movies that raise the bar when it comes to filmmaking, superhero movies in general don't come to my mind. Don't get me wrong, they have fantastic and outstanding VFX, great stunts, great costume design, dedicated acting, and a handful of well-written characters. As a whole, they still provide a satisfactory experience, and that is partly due to capable directors as well. Madam Web didn't have a capable director, or at the very least a very disinterested one. And this is not just an opinion, many scenes are not well put together and basic rules of filmmaking aren't abided by. Let me give you a few examples. It's gonna get technical from here on out, so if that's not your cup of tea, feel free to skip this section. Also, I'm not a director, but I noticed a few flaws and wasted opportunities here and there. Let's start with something easy. A match cut. The concept of it is simple. The last frame of the first scene matches the first frame in the next scene, in appearance. If there is a certain movement in one direction in the first shot, you keep the same direction in the next shot. Here's a scene attempting such a cut in the movie. She honks the car, then it cuts to her grabbing a can from the vending machine. Notice what's wrong? This is what it is supposed to look like. Is it a terrible flaw? No. Is it nitpicky and petty? Absolutely. The issue I have isn't that it's there, my issue is how many of them there are. Another one I picked up on is a missed opportunity for a screen wipe transition. The basics of it are simple. An object cuts across the image near the lens. With a little masking, you can create a seamless transition. The reason why you would use something like that is to create a smoother flow. In the movie, they ended up with a handful of these lingering frames, and it's visually slightly jarring. Credit where credit's due, there was an attempt to create this upside down style of filming, but it's half-assed. During the diner fight, there is one instance where everything flips on its head. I like that. But they immediately flip the footage back around, creating a confusing sense of what you're seeing. In my opinion, they should have maintained the upside down style until another impact reversed it, providing a visual cue to confirm the end of the effect. There are more examples like the wheel transition, but I want to highlight another stylistic issue instead, the lingering panning shots. The movie is chock full of these shots. They grind the pace to a halt or feel outright out of place. More often than not, the directing itself ended up breaking the immersion, at least for me. Opinions may differ. I often found myself thinking how I would have shot and cut the scenes differently, what details I would draw attention to, and how to pace it, and so on. I'm aware that this critique is highly subjective, nonetheless I think it's worth mentioning. Also, if you've been enjoying this video this far, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Same, but different.
Madam Web reminded me of another failed superhero anti-hero movie that you probably have never heard of, probably didn't even know the character exists. Bloodshot, another lesser known comic book character. Let me give you a brief overview of the character. He's a soldier who's brought back to life with nanomachines and is invincible now. The government keeps wiping his memory and sending him out on assassination missions until his memories resurface and he turns against his creators. Basically, he's the universal Winter Soldier. Here's why Madam Web reminded me of Bloodshot. They're both origin stories of unknown characters, but while one of them adheres to its comic book origins, the other does not. Bloodshot's backstory is a very significant part of the story. Figuring out his past is detrimental and deep implemented into the story going forward. Madam Web's backstory had no bearing on anything at all, therefore the payoff was shallow. The supporting cast in Bloodshot are intrinsic to the story. They choose sides, betray and instigate intrigues. In Madam Web, they don't serve much of a purpose. Bloodshot had interesting ideas and a clear vision of how to implement them. The few ideas Madam Web had were passable at best and terrible at worst. Both films were failures, but while one had an interesting premise and coherent script, it failed due to bad editing and ultimately disappointing action scenes. At the end of the day, it's still watchable. Madam Web failed everything from A to Z. It's almost unwatchable. Let me start by saying this. Madam Web cannot be rewritten with a few changes here and there to turn it into something interesting instead. A rich, superpowered villain failing to kill 3 helpless, unsupervised teenage girls is a strange premise. Also, it sucks that they outright murder him instead of apprehending him like benevolent superheroes do. You really need to go back to the drawing board and start from square one. Firstly, Cassie's ability needs to be better defined and have a detriment. I think temporary blindness after every use of her powers could have created an interesting backlash. If she sees 1 minute into the future, she's blind for a minute or two in return. Also, the random Kagebunshin no bullshit sure threw me for a loop. Secondly, the movie needs to establish a more meaningful conflict between the villain and Cassie rather than protecting strangers on a whim. Let's give the powers a more mystic origin. Let's say a hidden spider-worshipping tribe possesses the mystic fang of the fate-weaving spider god and protects it. People who imbibe the venom of the fang can change the web of fate and therefore the fate of the world. One problem down, suspension of disbelief. The villain and the mom should have been both injected with the venom. Subsequently, the unborn Cassie ends up with half the powers, premonition, whereas the villain ends up with physically enhanced abilities. Ezekiel wanting the premonitory powers for personal gain but failing to obtain them would make more sense. Many years later, after annihilating the Peruvian spider tribe to absorb their powers and become stronger, after killing a priestess, Ezekiel discovers Cassie is still alive and that consuming her blood would bestow her powers onto him, completing them. He decides to hunt her down. After the first encounter, Cassie keeps eluding him by always being a step ahead. She'd have premonitions of her imminent death but manages to change it. She has a never-changing recurring vision though of the slightly distant future where a girl from her neighborhood gets killed. This could provide an interesting internal conflict for the protagonist about helping a stranger in need or ignoring them, helping to establish Cassie's character traits. I'd cut the number of teenage girls to one and give her a more central role while trying to create a deeper bond and refreshing banter between the two. Whichever girl it is doesn't matter, but having 3 powerless girls just hiding here and there and dancing on a table was a terrible decision. Having a pair of characters with an interesting dynamic could have helped the story immensely. It would have been a little like Tony Stark and Peter, or Miles Morales and Peter. Lastly, I'd have the fledgling be poisoned by the villain and then saved by Cassie by bloodletting and the subsequent blood transfusion. This ends up giving her powers to defeat the villain and explains why Madame Web was tasked with ensuring her survival. This is just a brief glimpse of what it could have been. Other ideas could have been adapted, like depending on Madame Web's actions in the present, the protege she needs to protect changes. It's a bit gimmicky, but helps Madame Web set itself apart from other superhero origin movies. Next, we'll have a look at why Sony is trying to make these lesser known characters into a thing. The obvious reason is money. The less obvious reason is that Sony paid for the Spider-Man movie licensing rights in 1999, acquiring the rights to 900-ish characters. When Sony bought the rights, they also agreed to a timely stipulation. A Spider-Man movie must be produced every 5 years and 9 months. If Sony fails to comply, the rights will revert to the original owner, Marvel, who belongs to Disney. But there's more to it. When The Amazing Spider-Man 2, starring Andrew Garfield as the titular hero, underperformed at the box office, the then Sony Motion Pictures group head Amy Pascal said she's running out of options. There's only so many times an audience is interested in rewatching the same thing happening over and over again. The SSU is a ditch effort to expand the universe without having to rely on characters from the MCU. When Marvel expressed interest in borrowing Spider-Man for Civil War and bringing him into the MCU, Sony expressed interest in that as well. Behind closed doors, Disney and Sony struck a deal that led to the latest MCU iteration of Spider-Man played by Tom Holland. They now share a piece of the pie, but not everything that glitters is gold. That brings us to the limited potential of the inaptly named Sony Spider-Man universe. Let me address the elephant in the room. Venom, Morbius, Venom 2, Madame Web, and the upcoming Kraven movie all have one thing in common. The SSU's eponymous Spider-Man isn't in any of them. As long as he's being loaned to the MCU, he is not allowed to appear outside of it. Ergo, there will be no Spider-Man in the Sony Spider-Man universe. This absence begs the question of how much potential such an SSU actually has. What about Miles Morales, you ask? Answer: Spider-Man cannot appear in any other live-action movies. Animated features, Sony can pump out as many as they like. There are 2 defining factors that determine the success of these movies. One big factor, who'd have thunk it, it's the character's popularity. Venom is one of the better known Marvel characters despite being a villain. His design is recognizable and his origin story is rather well known. Besides that, in certain countries, he is the most popular villain, beating the likes of Thanos and the Joker. Popular characters have no issue attracting an audience. This Is the Joker was no different. Another big factor is story potential. Venom being an alien of unknown origin that bonds with humans like a parasite to survive on the planet, and the struggle to take over the host has a lot of potential. Add to that the hunger to feed on humans and superpowers, and you've got yourself a decent amount of conflict potential to work with. Additionally, there is the ability to create offspring, and you have yourself an interesting new universe on your hands, the Venomverse. Venom can thrive without Spider-Man. The military, dubious organizations, his offspring and other symbiotes characters are able to fill the void left behind by Spider-Man. There is one caveat though, it's less of a superhero movie and more of a sci-fi body snatcher story, along the likes of Species or Parasite the Maxim. Only if both these points are covered is there a chance of the movie to become a moderate success. Madam Web only ticks one of these boxes, story potential. With her ability to change fate, stories similar to Dark, Bodies or Final Destination could have been a possibility. Despite Sony owning roughly 900 characters tied to Spider-Man, almost none of them meet both criteria. I personally think Jackal has the potential to provide an interesting story, but he's not a well-known enough character. Chameleon might have the potential to be a protagonist in a spy movie, where we see what it's like to work for the other side for a change. But then again, interesting concept, low popularity. What do you guys think? Which characters could be turned into a successful movie? A Black Cat heist movie maybe? Share your opinions in the comments down below. In general, I'm perturbed about the SSU. I don't see any potential in it, and Morbius, Madam Web and the waning interest in Venom kinda prove it. I don't think Sony trying to force something that isn't there and probably never will work out for them no matter how much money or time they throw at it. In my humble opinion, investing in a cool new animated Spider-Man series for a new generation of children has more potential rather than these lackluster box office bombs. Spider-Man is the moneymaker and not random baddies of the week. I do not fault Sony for trying to expand their portfolio with characters that they own. Unfortunately, it works only for a handful of them, and even then, Spider-Man's presence is basically a must. Anyway, let me know what you think about the movie or the situation as a whole. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, make sure to check out my other videos and consider subscribing to the channel so I can reach my goal of getting 500 subscribers. It would help me out a lot. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again.